So what we're going to be talking about tonight in chapter 12 is going to be this. We're going to be talking about our less than freehold, also known as leasehold estates. Now, going back to the chapter where we spoke about freehold estates, just our freehold estates, what happens is this. And I see someone asked in the chat, can I get a manual? I'll definitely message you offline once we're done going through this chapter and we'll chat. So what I would say is this. Our less than freehold estates are going to be that of leasehold estates. They're synonymous with one another, okay? And when we were talking about freehold estates, okay, we said freehold estates, you have the full bundle of rights. And what that means, for those of you who weren't here for that, okay, is that the bundle of rights is ownership. That's when you own a property. And what we remember is this, and again, if you want to go back, that's either chapter 6 or chapter 5. One of those chapters we discussed the bundle of rights. But just as a quick little recap, that includes the right to possess, use, transfer, exclude, and encumber, okay? So again, not going to go into that terribly too much because, again, we're not talking about the freehold estates where you get the full bundle of rights, okay? We're going to be talking about our less than freehold estates, which include this. They basically say, hey, you get the right to possess and the right to use, okay? So you get the right to possess and you get the right to use, okay? So as someone who holds a less than freehold or leasehold interest in property, you have the right to possess and to use the property. So a lot of people always ask, Stu, so the leaseholder, right? The tenant has an interest in the real property? Yes, they do. And that is, again, less than freehold. So if we say freehold estates are forms of ownership where you get the full bundle of rights, again, covered those in a prior chapter, then the leasehold estates are going to be less than ownership, but that person still has a right to use the property and to possess it, okay? It is possession and rights of usage. So now let's talk about the different types of less than freehold estates, okay? The different types of less than freehold estates. Those are going to be an estate for years. And let's talk about that first. In an estate for years, how we identify it, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you how we identify an estate for each one of these. Then I'm going to tell you examples of them. So an estate for years has a definitive end date, okay? And this is any lease with an end date, okay? A lease for 12 months, it's an estate for years, okay? If you go away on vacation and you get a weekend rental, okay? That's an estate for years, okay? If you get a lease and you get it for 6 months, that is an estate for years. If you go and rent an Airbnb for a week in Charleston, South Carolina, that is an estate for years, okay? So it is identified as having a less than freehold or leasehold estate for a definitive period of time. Definitive period of time, okay? So if there is an end date, there is no need to do any kind of advance notice, anything like that. It will simply end and terminate on that date, and it will be classified as an estate for years. Next one is going to be a periodic tenancy. This is classified as being an auto renew period to period. Okay? Auto renew period to period. An example of this would be a month to month. Now, could you have a week to week, a year to year, a month, a 6 month to 6 month? Sure. Are they as common? No, not at all. But it's something that you could have them. The litmus test for the estate for years, or the period, for the periodic tenancy, is going to be that it auto renews. So that month to month, basically, bottom line is this: all you need to do is know that it is just auto renewing right into it. Okay. So in the estate for years, we have a definitive end date. In a periodic tenancy, it's basically there's an auto renewing period of some sort. Next one is an estate at will. And this is typically a holdover tenancy, but this has no defined terms. However, it is with the consent of the landlord and tenant. Okay? So basically, Stu, when would you see an estate at will? Okay, when is this common? So let me give you an example of when that might be super duper uber common. Okay, one time that would be common is this: when you have a lease. Let's say it's a lease for 12 months. At the end of that 12 months, what you do is this: you go right to the landlord and say, hey, we're closing on our home, and that's kind of up in the air right now. We don't know when we're going to be closing, if it's going to be 2 days after, 4 days after, a week, a month, a year, or this, or that. And the landlord goes, you know what? Stay here however long you need to. Not a problem at all. So that creates what we would refer to as an estate at will. There are no defined terms, okay? However, the landlord and tenant are cool with it. It's fine. Now, let me give you a scenario where, let's say, the tenant stays for a month, okay? They stay for a month, and what happens is this: after they stay for a month, they say, you know what? We should be giving the landlord rent. He's still letting us stay here. We should give him rent for the month. And they go give the landlord rent for a month. It has now changed that tenancy and that estate into a periodic tenancy, because the hallmarks of an estate at will is that there's no defined terms. As soon as you define terms, so if I give you rent for a month, if I give you rent for a week, what that does is that establishes a term, okay? And if I'm paying you term to term, then what happens is what we have is a periodic tenancy, as opposed to what we did have, which is, oh, just stay here however long you want, whatever the case may be, and blah, 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 okay? And blah, 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 blah. So that is the situation with that. Any questions so far, guys? I want to make sure that you're all following along with me and that there's no concerns, no issues, no burning desires, nothing that I could possibly clear up, because we have, kind of straightforward. That's why I said this is going to be a pretty short chapter tonight. Now, the last one that we have is an estate at sufferance. Okay? This is like an estate at will. There are no defined terms. And it is an illegal holdover. Okay? Meaning that the landlord is suffering. That's what I always say. I say the landlord is suffering in this, okay? And what happens is the landlord typically wants them out, okay? So Shakira asked, in an estate at will, are no funds exchanged? Well, here's the thing. As soon as you exchange funds in some manner, shape, or form, you're defining a period. So what happens is there's a periodic tenancy. So yeah, typically what happens is this: there are no defined terms. So isn't the exchange of funds and the exchange of money a defined term, right? I mean, that's putting some structure to it. So what happens is, in order to protect the tenant, because here's the thing, the reason why we classify it as such once there are funds that are exchanged is because we want to make sure that the tenant is protected, right? Because if you have an unscrupulous landlord who's like, no, I could kick you out at any time, because here's the thing, an estate at will could end at any time, okay? But as soon as you pay for that month, okay, and the landlord accepts it, you have now established that the term is 1 month. And that if you continue to stay there without the landlord saying to you, hey, you're at sufferance and I want you gone, then what happens is this: you're simply creating a periodic tenancy, okay? You're creating a periodic tenancy there. So that's the situation there. So yeah, that was a great question to ask, are there no funds exchanged? And yeah, in essence, because one of the precursors for an estate at will is that there are no defined terms. As soon as you define a term, it basically changes the whole entire thing. So that being said, let's go into the different types of leases. And now what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to basically give you an overview of these leases and an overview of the terms, broad stroke of the pen, not going into real detail on this, because the question is this: do you need that to pass your exam? No, thank you. You don't need that to pass your exam. So again, I would say, you don't need it to pass your exam. An in-depth, real, grotesquely detailed version of this. So what I'm giving you sufficient to pass the test. First one is a gross lease. That's where the tenant will pay a flat fee, okay? On whatever the terms are, if it's monthly, if it's bi-monthly, if it's weekly, if it's annually, okay? There's just a flat fee, okay? They might pay for some other utilities, things like that, but a gross lease. And most leases are gross leases, okay? The next one is net or triple net. And I am going to give you my grotesquely simple explanation to this. And that is, you basically have a flat fee plus a ton of expenses, okay? So you're going to probably be paying, as the tenant, you're probably going to be paying the landlord's insurance, any kind of maintenance fees. Now, you're probably thinking, Stu, who in their right mind wants a triple net or a net lease? Okay, that sounds awful. You're like paying everything, okay? Yes, you pay everything. And I'll tell you some people who want that. My favorite store, your favorite store, everyone's favorite store, Target, okay? Also known as Target, okay? Some of those big box retailers, Best Buy, they love these. Why? Because when they expand them, they want to put up just, go, oh, let's build a new Target. What happens is this. They run into a situation where they could either do one of two things: buy or lease the space, okay? Now, they would love to buy the space, okay? But what happens is that becomes cost prohibitive. And also, they don't want to be carrying for the most part. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some crazy wonky scenarios. Won't get into those. There are outlier situations. There's always outlier situations. But what I will tell you is this: for the most part, it is cost prohibitive for them to own commercial space. So what happens? Some other guy owns the commercial space. And what they say is this. They say, hey, Mr. Landlord, we want to pay all of your expenses, as many as we can. Why? Because they want the benefits of being a tenant, which means that they do not have to put up an exorbitant amount of capital or leverage their credit to get an exorbitant amount of capital. Okay, so those are your two options when you're investing, right? Is basically you use cash that's in the bank or you get a loan, okay? And then the third thing is they want all the benefits as far as tax write-offs of being a property owner. So triple net or net lease would give you that. Tell me, guys, was that an awesome explanation or what? Like, do you guys get that one? Hope you do. Hope you do. Give me a... Yeah, that's basically, that's basically... It's a real super simple one. So percentage lease. A percentage lease is usually a flat fee plus a percent of gross sales, okay? I see a bunch of thumbs up. I love that. Thank you guys for communicating and letting me know that you're still with me and you're following along. So percentage lease is a percentage of the gross sales. So typically when this would be appropriate is shopping malls, things like that. Okay, so think about it. Like over here in Central Jersey, we have two very popular malls. Okay, we have the Freehold Mall and we have the Monmouth Mall, and it's almost like the tale of two cities. Okay, one is very, very modern, one is very, very new. Actually, they're all about the same age, but what happened was the Freehold Mall kind of took off because there was a lot of success happening there. And what happened was this: the landlord had percentage leases. So when there was success being had, okay, when there was success being had, okay, you had a situation where the Freehold Mall was putting money back into it, okay, and they were attracting new businesses, they were expanding, they were modernizing, and then the Monmouth Mall was like, yeah, we still have a Sam Goody, and I actually all jokes aside, I still think they have in 2020 a Sam Goody. I think it might be the only Sam Goody that's around. But like that's an example of like they don't really have a much better a great business plan, and that mall has been there for what feels like it's basically like if you want to go to watch any 90s movie, like that's what it feels like the Monmouth Mall has been trapped in. And it's because the stores have not been successful and they haven't really gotten a chance to take advantage of that percentage lease. Okay. And I'm sure if you're watching this anywhere else, you know, because like I said, I am recording this. You could think of the same thing where there's a place where you're like, oh man, it hasn't been super successful. And that's because they probably are on a percentage lease. But as far as leases, less than freehold estates, that's what I want you to remember. So a less than freehold estate is the right to possess and use a property. Okay. These are your four different types of less than freehold estates. And this right here are your different types of leases. So typically what happens is your lease will be one of these three, okay? And it will fall under one of the different types of less than freehold estates that you have. So, guys, what I'm going to do now is this. Ask you if there's any questions or concerns or burning desires, and I'd be able to answer them for you right now. And I'm going to stop recording so that you guys could ask me as many questions as you like.